Good morning, Dan and Amy, and we're pleased to be joined now by Lieutenant Colonel Jim Carafano, Vice President of the Catherine and Shelby Cullum Davis Institute for International Studies at the Heritage Foundation, and author of books including Wiki at War and Private Sector Public Wars. Jim, thanks for being with us. Appreciate it.
So what's the answer? What's the answer?
What is the answer?
What's the answer?
I know that's the show, right?
Oh, what's the question? Well, we have an answer if you have a question, Jim.
It's that this, and I don't even like that reference to Jeopardy because Alex Trebek is with discontinuing his cancer treatments, and I mean, I just come on,
he's at peace with God.
That's right. This is a time of concern for Alex Trebek. Okay, let's start with this. Sort of below the fold, but I've been reading some suggestions from other foreign policy experts like yourself that as the world is consumed with combating COVID and trying to rein in China, particularly in the West, something that's maybe happening is Islamic terrorist organizations reconstituting themselves in North Africa and the Middle East. Do you believe that is happening? And if so, how much of a national security threat does that pose? Are we asleep at the switch again with respect to those organizations?
Well, it's always been ongoing to some degree, right? And you had to expect this, that particularly after the caliphate was dissolved, that some of those guys weren't going to go home. They were going to go out to other places, set up new networks and get going again. I mean, this goes back to, people still talk about the president's Muslim ban, which of course there never was a Muslim ban. No country was ever designated because it's a religious affiliation. There's literally hundreds of countries around the world with Muslims. The only countries that we banned, some of which of course had very little Muslims, were countries where we were worried about the outflow of fighters going to those countries and then potentially coming to the United States. And we actually we've done a very, very good job effectively blocking that. So they're there. There are ongoing activities. There's been activities in North Africa. Having said that, the U.S. military is actually looking to ratchet down its counterterrorism operations in North Africa, looking more towards other countries and partners to kind of maintain that as they shift to focus on something else. So it's, I guess probably the best analogy is, in the 1980s, we had organized crime. We had the five families. These guys were all powerful. We arrested the heads of the five families. And, what you round up with was kind of like Tony Soprano, kind of the mini mobster. And right now what we have is a transnational terrorist threat that's out there. It is transnational, but what we don't see is the capacity or the will or the capability to really direct international operations that would really come after U.S. interests. So it's like, we don't stop going after the mob, right? But we don't give it the emphasis that we did, but you've got to kind of keep an eye on it because if you don't, it'll metastasize right back like it did before.
Speaking of the five families, there's this good mini documentary series on crime, mob control of New York in the 70s and 80s in particular, before Giuliani, and the five families and the RICO cases that were made against the mob and the heads of those five families, the commission, as it was called. And it called to mind what's happening out in the streets with respect to groups like Antifa and perhaps others, but also just street gangs that are engaged in drug trafficking in major cities that are responsible for the preponderance of the overwhelming majority of the violence, like in places like Chicago, but not limited. And I'm wondering, I know this is a domestic issue, but we're melding we're melding international and domestic, federal and state and local these days. And I wonder if you think that the FBI support that Trump is providing and other federal law enforcement support Trump is providing cities like Portland and Chicago and Kansas City, if there should be an effort to sort of take the model that Giuliani used in New York with respect to the mafia, and there should be federal support over the top of states and localities to do sort of a RICO-style case against the street gangs that are responsible for all this violence and domestic terrorist organizations like Antifa as needed.
Well, that's absolutely something I look at because one of the portfolios I have is Homeland Security, and that's looking at the domestic security architecture, and Homeland Security Department has a role to play in this. And so the first point is, and I think that folks have to understand, is there's a difference between protesting, and which is lawful, or even if you're going to do protests in peaceful noncompliance with the law, whatever, that's fine. Which is what we saw in the immediate aftermath of George Floyd's death. But what's going on in Portland and Seattle is something very different. Rioting, looting, attacking federal officers, destroying federal property, these are crimes. And when you have people show up at these crimes and they've got chainsaws and lasers and frozen water bottles, there's obviously, this isn't spontaneous crime. This is intentional crime. And when you see the tactics that they do change and are coordinated, it appears to be organized crime. Mm-hmm. And if it's organized crime, that means there's a conspiracy there. There's a criminal conspiracy. And a criminal conspiracy is absolutely prosecutable under RICO. So, yeah, I think from a public safety standpoint and from a requirement for law enforcement, yeah, it's absolutely something they should look at. But here's the thing I think, which is, if you go back and you look at the history of RICO and everything else, it works best when local, state, and federal prosecutors are working together.
Right.
Because what the federal government's really concentrating on is kind of the interstate part of that activity. When state, local, and federal work together, that's when you really kick butt. It's when they're at odds with each other that you have difficulty. So the other, if you want to go look at another documentary, go look at one on Whitey Bulger, which is where the federal, state, and local guys in Boston were not cooperating. They were actually very suspicious of each other, and with some good reason. But the result of that is people like Whitey Bulger kind of, could run for 25 years without, being taken down. So the problem in Portland and Seattle is you have local and state, not the police, but local and state officials, which are thwarting cooperation with the federal government. But the federal government can still have to go after these guys anyway for a RICO case if they can make one, and they should.
And then we'll find out, too, that who's supplying them, like who's paying for all this. Because there's got to be a money person behind all of it, right?
Absolutely, and that's what you really want. So when they announced like 18 federal indictments, I'm like, for people that were attacking federal property in Portland, that's interesting. Not as interesting to me as who are these 18 people? What connections can we make against these 18 people? What kind of potential evidence could we get from these 18 people by interrogating them? And where does that lead? I mean, back to your analogy of the mafia, what cracked the mafia was not just arresting soldiers, which we can do all day long. And these guys have money, they can, like the mafia, they can bail them out all day long. It's when you map the organization, number one, that's the first requirement. And then number two, when you gather evidence of organizational activity by the leadership, so you can charge them with conspiracy and break up the organization. That's what's important.
Right, and also the way they gathered that evidence was to wiretap the homes of the mob bosses and their meeting places and so forth. And look, James O'Keefe over at Project Veritas has already done a little bit of that legwork in terms of his undercover reporting on Antifa in Portland, for example. And it's that kind of information that shows the organization, at the leadership of it, providing orders, providing resources. This, as you say, a conspiracy that starts to put a case together against Antifa and other organizations, street gangs as well. And this is where, and this is, I think, what A.G. Barr was talking about a couple of months ago, where he talks about federal law enforcement resources being brought to bear on the prosecution side and the surveillance investigative side via the FBI as needed.
And here's where I would say we need to get on this. I mean, there's two things. One is these guys adapt. Look at how they've changed and evolved their tactics, which is, again, another sign of organization. But the violence has gotten more targeted and more dangerous, and you have to believe that they're looking for opportunities to grow and expand. That what they have in Portland and Seattle is local officials who are essentially letting them do this. They're going to be looking for other places in other cities where they find similar openings, so they can repeat and expand this violence, and it's going to continue and grow at least through the fall. I think that's without. And if it's not broken, it's going to grow and get more dangerous at least to the fall. I think that's realistic to assume.
He is Lieutenant Colonel Jim Carafano, VP of the Catherine and Shelby Cullum Davis Institute for International Studies at the Heritage Foundation. Jim, thanks for joining us again.
Yep. And he joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.
Listen to Dan and Amy on your smartphone. Download the AM 560 mobile app today at 560theanswer.com/mobile.
Can the daily recommended servings of fruits and vegetables fit into just 6 capsules? Yes. We start by sourcing organically grown whole fruits and vegetables. We ensure they are picked at peak ripeness. All of our produce is third-party tested for pesticides, heavy metals, bad bacteria, and nutrients. They are then washed, cut, and put through an advanced vacuum cold process which removes the water using pressure. This maximizes the nutritional value while preserving the color, smell, and taste of the fruit or vegetable. The freeze-dried food is then ground into a fine powder without adding any additives, fillers, or extracts. These powdered foods are then mixed in our proprietary blends and encapsulated, locking out air and moisture. The capsules are then bottled and shipped directly to our customers. Balance of Nature is now offering 35% off on any new preferred order. Go to balanceofnature.com today and use discount code CHICAGO.
Everyone is talking about what's going to happen with the schools this fall. For many of you, there's a lot of uncertainty about what your school is going to do. The password is private school. Maybe your child had a bad experience while e-learning earlier this year. Maybe you know that being in the classroom is the best environment for learning. Well, we have some good news. There are many private schools around Chicagoland that are not facing the same challenges as public schools. These private schools have the ability to hold classes in person in the classroom while following all appropriate state guidelines for safety. And you now have a way to enroll your child at half the price of regular tuition. It's called halfpriceschools.com. It's simple. Find a private school near you, purchase the tuition voucher, and prepare to send your child off to school this fall, into the classroom this fall. Halfpriceschools.com has schools who are committed to in-person learning this fall, including Trinity Lutheran in Lombard, St. John's Lutheran in Chicago, Families of Faith Christian Academy in Shanahan, Christian Liberty in Arlington Heights, Calvin Christian in South Holland, St. Andrew's Lutheran in Park Ridge, Emmanuel Lutheran in Palatine, Kankakee Trinity Academy in Kankakee. So don't delay. Schools will be starting again in a matter of weeks. Visit halfpriceschools.com today. Many of these vouchers have already sold out, so do not wait. Visit halfpriceschools.com today. That's halfpriceschools.com.
If you've fallen behind in your credit card payments during the shutdown, you're probably feeling some added pressures. And even a brief history of late payments can lead to a big drop in your credit score. But you don't have to solve these problems alone. Trinity Debt Management can help. We'll work with your creditors, put a stop to late fees and other penalties, and make a plan that helps you get caught up. We'll also consolidate your bills into one easy-to-manage monthly payment and negotiate much lower interest rates. Not only will you find immediate relief, you'll save thousands. And don't worry, it's not alone. It's a smart way to get back on track. All you have to do is give Trinity a quick call, and we'll take care of the rest. Right now, no one really knows what the future will bring. But one thing is for sure. If your debt has you down, we should talk. Here's the number.
Call 1-800-990-6976. That's 1-800-990-6976.
Audiences everywhere are saying Uncle Tom is a must-see movie.
Uncle Tom was amazing, simply brilliant.
Uncle Tom's the finest, most thought-provoking documentary I've ever seen.
Oh my God, what an amazing movie.
Every American needs to watch your film.
It doesn't matter if you're left, right, or center. It's a great movie.
It's just absolutely wonderful.
An eye-opening masterpiece of the real history of America.
I am blown away.
Breathtaking. I sat here with tears rolling down my face through most of this movie. Thank you so very, very much for doing this.
Uncle Tom is one of the most important documentaries of our time.
I highly recommend everyone get it. I wish I could figure out a way to get everybody to watch it.
Purchase now at UncleTom.com. Use promo code Chicago for 20% off. That's promo code Chicago.
I think that you may save America with this movie.
UncleTom.com.
AM 560. The Answer.
Dan and Amy, following our conversation with Jim Carafano and his point that this will go on if federal law enforcement does not intervene where state and mostly local authorities, the political civilian authorities, not the police, refuse to. To his point, What appears to be a self-defense killing of a BLM protester in Austin, Texas over the weekend. The guy's name, the BLM protester, of course, is a white guy.
Of course, because he's down with the struggle.
Named Garrett Foster, who was armed with an AK-47. He was killed amid an armed standoff with a driver who shot and killed him while being confronted by protesters.
Well, Garrett Foster allegedly fired 5 rounds into his car. And so he fired back and killed Garrett Foster. That's the report that I read on ABC.
No.
No?
No. But Garrett, the chief of police in Austin, said the driver shot first, which he said came after Foster pointed his gun at the driver. The driver turned himself into police. It's being investigated. But it sounds like a self-defense killing and appropriate. You point a gun at me, that's using lethal force. Mm-hmm. I have a chance to respond. You don't point a gun at anything you don't intend to shoot. And so the driver, if that story is what happened, was absolutely within his right to defend himself.
And who brings an AK-47 to a quote-unquote peaceful protest? That's a riot, folks.
Earlier in the evening, before he was shot and killed, Garrett Foster gave a bit of an interview about why he's toting an AK-47 around.
Okay.
Peaceful protester.
I'm a tough guy.
Tell us a little bit about your gun again.
It's AK-47.
What you got it out tonight?
They don't let us march in the streets anymore, so got to practice some of our rights.
Man, do you feel like you'll need to use it?
Nah, I think if I use it against the cops, I'm dead. And I think all the people that hate us and, want to say to us are too big of a push to stop and actually do anything about it. So
why'd you start carrying?
Well, our roommate got arrested.